welcome everybody. I'm proudly introducing Elizabeth Patterson. She did come to Cali a while ago as mayor of Benicia, where she was mayor for 3 terms. And we got into an email conversation, and then all of a sudden it turns out, oh, she's now a professor at Sonoma State doing water and land use. And so her background is phenomenal, all the 3-term mayor, but she was also chair of the GPAC for 3 years, the general plan. She's done she was the president of the Northern Division of the League of Cities. She worked on the county water agencies. She has just an amazing mix of public, policy, but then adding the expertise of the water use. So, think about questions that you might want to ask her. My take on all this is that as our water situation becomes more and more dire, and climate change effects are more and more dire, we city officials are going to be the ones that are going to get the pitchforks, right? It's not going to, not going to be the state agencies. It's going to come back to us first. And so we haven't been given a lot of guidance and good advice, I don't think, in terms of how we cities should be planning and what are the things that we should be watching for with our local agencies. How do we make sure that our local, water agencies are doing all the right things? I don't even know what to ask. And so I'm hoping that Elizabeth will, help guide us, and with her unique background, and give us some really good advice. So
Thanks,
thank
Susan.
you.
That was very generous. So I do have a slide presentation, and that's going to help establish kind of the hierarchy of state water policy, which I think is surprising to a lot of people. And in my career, I worked for the state for 25 years, I think it was, and at 2 agencies, and one of them was the Department of Water Resources and on the California Water Plan. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, but how this conversation got going is what I wanted to talk about a little bit, and then I'll follow up if you have any questions. Is that since I've been retired from the council, I've gotten involved in an issue with SB 35. We have the only President Lincoln Commission garrison and barracks site in California, and certainly west of the Mississippi, and probably the United States during the Civil War. And the historic structures are on the national, as is the district, because the district is the open space area where the parade grounds were. And so, believe it or not, SB 35 allegedly qualifies. And we have gotten attorneys, very good law firm, and so we're doing a GoFundMe, and I will send the links and the information to you. We think this is of statewide interest. And there are it's not an attack on SB 35 directly, but at the end of the day, it's going to wind up being questioned. And so that's kind of where we are. So, as I said, that's where my passion is right now. And I'm a lecturer at Sonoma State. I'm not a professor. And what's really funny is my daughter was an adjunct professor at Sonoma State. So it's like reverse. Usually the daughters follow you. I'm following my daughter. So I'm going to do a share screen, and hopefully this will work. Okay, so this is managing water resources for sustainability. Let me see. So how do you advance the slides?
I think you just go down, page down, or
I know, I was
click.
trying, but for some reason it doesn't want to do that.
Oh.
I
I see an arrow at the bottom, maybe on the bottom left.
That
one.
There we go.
Yay.
So, this is a map of California water quilt of hydrologic regions, and each one performs differently. Most of us are disconnected from these and don't really think when we turn the tap on that we live in these different kinds of regions. And then California water management is a tale of extremes. And this is a chart of when we have rain and when we don't. And sometimes we have floods and drought in the same year. And there are a number of reasons why that happens, but that is in fact unique to California, I think. So this is the effect of climate change, as Susan was saying. We are looking to the future for things being different and not necessarily worse. It kind of depends on how you look at it. But the system that we have built was built for another time. And you can see the historic flows over here. I'll put my little, and now we're looking at higher, earlier peak flows. A lot of that is due to the fact that the snowpack, which is our largest reservoir, simply is disappearing. So we get a lot more runoff earlier. And also the rain, the precipitation is coming earlier. And so the system isn't built for that. And that's one of the challenges that we have.
So am I seeing that? So I see this graph and I see these peaks.
Go back.
Oh, no. Oh, I'm sorry.
You want me to go on?
Yeah, no, I see those peaks up there. Is that, those are new, right? We didn't used to get those peaks, right?
No, we
what
actually
you're
just in a little bit, and kind of the opposite. We get atmospheric rivers. We've always gotten atmospheric rivers. They're just coming in sooner, and if they come in at all, they come in fewer number.
Got it. Okay.
That's probably what you're seeing. And everybody knows what atmospheric rivers are, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
What are they?
So, thanks. The atmospheric rivers are where we get the really intense rainstorms, and not the showers, but the actual intense rainstorms. And they actually come in as a river. You can see them. I didn't put a slide in, but you can actually see them as a river. For years and years, the West Coast didn't have the instrumentation to actually measure this. Everybody was focused on hurricanes on the East Coast. So the airplanes and the special equipment and all the science was being done on the East Coast. Very little was being done on the West Coast. And through some leadership with the Sonoma Water Agency and federal agencies and state agencies, they now have over the years begun to put the equipment in place, and they're now mapping these atmospheric rivers. They can tell how long they're going to last and how intense they will be. And that's why your weather reports are more accurate these days. I'm having a problem with my arrow here. Okay, there we go. So this is clearly a system in crisis. The chart shows that. The slide on the left is if you were living in 1925, that something is
Elizabeth, you're breaking,
and so the land has subsided, sunk. Say that again.
You're breaking up quite a bit. Is there? Are you guys hearing her break up quite a bit?
Yes, and Elizabeth, it might be good for you to turn off your video while you're speaking, and you won't have the.
Right.
That's a good idea. So
we'll still be able to see your slides, but your audio will be stronger.
Right. Let's see if that works. That's the good idea.
I think that's much better.
So cute. Your
love,
screenshot.
Love your picture.
Yes.
Right. Patient at meetings. So in 1925, you would have been standing there. The land has sunk that much, which is an amazing phenomena. So we have increasing drought impacts. We have unreliable water supplies. We have increasing flood risk because of the intensity of the storms. We just saw an example of the increasing intensity of storms in Florida. We have groundwater depletion, which is the subsidence, and this is major. It causes bridges to not have the support system and canals to break apart. So it's very serious, and we get to pay for that, by the way. That irritates me. We have degraded water quality for a bunch of reasons. Declining environmental conditions. We have a huge number of listed species as well as non-listed species that are disappearing near extinction. And we have an aging infrastructure, which in California grew and it invested in infrastructure, but now we're sort of in the adult years and we haven't invested in keeping up our infrastructure. So, so that's, sorry, I keep losing my arrow here. And so those are the climate change impacts is the last point. We have systemic and institutional challenges, and overcoming them increases the return on investment. If we don't overcome them, we'll be spending a lot of money, much more money. So we currently have a fragmented and uncoordinated decision, initiative, and actions situation. We have inconsistent, inflexible, and conflicting regulations. And I think most of us who've been elected can easily identify with that. We have insufficient capacity for data-driven decision-making, although that is being addressed. It's one of the few successes we've had in the legislature over the years for consistent investment, and that is the collecting the data. We have insufficient and unstable funding, and I'll go into a little bit of details on that in just a little bit. And we have a very inadequate performance tracking, and this is important for a variety of reasons because we spend money on things that are supposed to perform. And if we don't have good tracking, we don't know that we're spending our money wisely. So the top of the pile for state policy is the water resilience portfolio. And a portfolio is like any portfolio, financial portfolio, and that it's a diversity of things. And so this is the first bullet is to maintain and diversify water supplies, and to diversify regional supplies to strengthen water security. And we can go into details about what that means, particularly in the Bay Area. Then we need to protect and enhance natural systems. At the end of the day, natural systems actually help us have better water retention and water quality. And we're learning, for instance, in forest management, that more adaptive and holistic environmental management is how we can reduce the terrible wildfires that we have. Building connections is to improve physical infrastructure to store, move, and share water. Folks in Contra Costa County have been very aggressive in doing that, and that's quite a story, and we can go into details on that. There are other regions that are also pretty good at that. And it just more needs to happen. And then we need to be prepared. We need to understand about flashier floods, which means a higher volume at a higher speed, which can cause a lot of problems. Deeper droughts. We're in a 1,200-year drought now, so it's kind of hard to imagine a deeper drought, and hotter temperatures, which complicates things a great deal. So the principles in the water priorities are for preparing the water resilience portfolios to prioritize. And there's a real emphasis on multi-benefit approaches. And a really good example of that is taking advantage of a low-lying parkland, having it capture floodwater. You can store it as stored stormwater and then use it later on. Utilize natural infrastructure, such as forest and floodplains. And we need to stop building in forest and stop building on floodplains. We need to embrace innovation and new technologies, and we're pretty good at that. We just need to be faster. We need to encourage regional approaches in watersheds, and there are some regions that are better about that than others, and Bay Area is kind of a mixed bag, actually. We need to incorporate successful approaches from other parts of the world. And people will immediately think in terms of Israel, which does amazing work in terms of conservation and water use for their crops as well as for their cities. There are other good examples as well, and we need to integrate. So we need to make sure that our investments match our policies and our programs are carrying out those policies across state government, and it does not work that way. And we can give some examples of that if you're interested. And we need to strengthen our partnerships with local, federal, and tribal governments. And it's not widely known, but DWR years ago worked with the tribes and has participated in their tribal water summits. And if you think about, a lot of tribes are at the headwaters, and it makes a lot of sense to work with the tribes. Well, they also have knowledge that we're learning to use in terms of management. And you have seen that in the news with the forest management approaches. So those are sort of exciting. This is the sustainability requires big collaboration, agency alignment, and sector co-management. And so this Venn diagram is to show that everything overlaps. It's all shared. It's not standalone. And so when we talk about multi-benefits, we can look at each one of these. And what is not apparent here, and as a land use planner always irritates me, is that land use planning goes across all of these. And I wish they, this is a slide from DWR, and I wish they would include land use. So we have integrated water management. I think some of you know that you participate in integrated water management programs, and they're really great, and they need more support. And I would be happy to talk about that later as well. What they include are multiple sectors, multiple discipline and planning. They support multiple benefit projects. It basically establishes a place that's safe and comfortable to work with different people from different areas to find solutions that you can agree to. So it's a great process. It's, as I said, it's not well funded. This is the variable statewide, and I'll explain this. It's not, and this kind of gets to heart to one of the questions that Susan shared with me. So you'll see in water year 2011 that it's wet, and that agriculture is using 34% of the 92.7 million acre feet of water. And in a critical dry year, 2014, agriculture uses 54%. And the reason is that there's less water, and agriculture, in order to continue to operate, uses more water. And the city, you'll see how the cities respond and the effect on the environment. And so I think the public doesn't always appreciate just the math involved in sharing water. Agriculture is using more of it, but it's not because they're growing more crops. It's just because they're using more of less water. And there are consequences of that. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. I lost my arrow again. So this, I think you will all be very interested in. For a long time, the California Water Plan did not look at financing on fiscal issues. And about 5 years ago, it started looking at that. And frankly, everyone was kind of shocked at this chart. And you will see that the state expends only $2 billion a year on water management, which is only about 2% of the state general fund for water. 80% of the investment is from local and regional entities, and that's us, and that deals with the water rates. And then 75% of that 80% is ongoing cost, the cost of processing water and wastewater. And that a lot of areas, districts, water districts, and people who are retailers as well as wholesalers have a backlog of investment of about $350 billion. That means, like in Benicia, certainly our wastewater treatment facility is aging. It's exposed to rising sea level, and it's a backlog for us, and it's very similar to many communities. So this is the pain that you hear with water rates, and we can talk a little bit about that after I get through this presentation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I $350 billion.
Yes.
That's and do people in Sacramento agree with that analysis?
Yes.
Or
No, that was
Whoa.
done, that was an independent assessment by the engineers, US engineers.
My God. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just not, we haven't been investing. So California Water Plan, the Department of Water Resources didn't exist before the State Water Project. It was formed out of several water agencies. And when the State Water Project was conceived, one of the things that the legislature said is that we need to have a bulletin. So think in terms of the Army Corps of Engineers, and they have their reports. Well, this DWR followed that format, and they created Bulletin 3, and that was in 1957. And it kind of evolved over time, but the major shift was instigated by the legislature at the end of 1999. And they said that the next Bulletin 3 had to be comprehensive, sustainable, and inclusive. And they created a committee that was made up of others. Instead of being a supply and demand report, which is what the bulletin was, it became much more, and it has evolved since then. And so it's really good. And I will show you how to get it. I keep losing my arrow. So it's a statewide strategic plan for understanding current and future conditions. It's really written in a manner that local government electeds can understand and participate in, because most of us are policy wonks, right? But it's also useful in that it has tools. It shows what, it has a vision and policies and that sort of thing, but it also provides tools to help local leadership and in the analysis of their own particular situation. So the recommendations are deep and comprehensive, and they're kind of in a continuous state of being updated. So for instance, here are the 30 resource management strategies. We call them RMSs. And you can see that it's really extensive. The land use planning and management is over in the right-hand column under practice, research, stewardship. We created a chart, and I succeeded in getting land use planning and management to be continuously across the chart, because it really is key to almost all. I can't think of one of these that land use planning and management doesn't apply. So there is an update in 2018 for sustainable goals and actions to overcome challenges. And you can go online and see the 2018, and they're in the process now of updating to 2023. So it has to be updated every 5 years. And so there's a lot of technical information here. About a third of the budget is actually technical data gathering. And then there's the participation with the committee and the various trends. Right now, I think everyone's pretty focused on the underrepresented and vulnerable communities. That has become really a target for state policy and for some local communities. And but at the end of the day, it's really understanding the decision making that locals do, as well as the decision making in Sacramento with adaptive management and long-term planning. It's three areas. This is we're in October of 2022. So this plan is coming together, and it will be presented to the governor sometime in mid 2023. And after the governor signs off on this plan, it becomes a plan for 2023 for 5 years. So the focus areas are climate adaptation. We've kind of gone over the changes and everything. Watershed resilience, which I'd be happy to talk a little bit more in detail, and then equity. And it's a real issue. It not only is an issue in available water and water quality, but it's in affordability. And that is going to become even more as we go forward. So improving watershed resilience, adapting to climate vulnerability. Here are some approaches that are being considered, focusing on watersheds and integrated water management planning. So it's kind of complicated for us in the Bay Area because we have our own small watersheds, which would be water that runs off of, just to take an example, Mount Diablo, for instance, or Tamalpais, but also we get our water supplied by water from the Sierra. And so we ought to be concerned about that watershed. Okay, where'd my arrow go? The arrow keeps disappearing. Sorry about that. And so the communication and engagement plan for 2023 is to align and build support for the update 2023. And they have reviewed the water resilience portfolio principles. It's about 45 pages and it's available online and it's worth taking a look at. Core state agency team, and I can go over those, but it's the usual suspects. It would be the Department of Food and Ag, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, State Lands Commission, Department of Water Resources, State Water Resources Control Board, and so forth. And then the state and federal agency networks, we have a pretty good relationship with a lot of the federal agencies, NOAA with their science and Army Corps with their projects and so forth. And then we have a tribal advisory committee. And this is like, if you're in the State Department, you have to actually have State Department training to work with the tribes. And I would be happy to explain that later. And then we also have this policy advisory committee, and which has been very, very useful in the past. And then topic and place-based workshops. And my crew is at this table that's right in front of you in this slide. That's the group I used to work for. I retired in 2020. So I still see these guys. How to access the water plan information. As I said, it's online, so you can visit the water plan web portal. And then I highly recommend subscribing to the water plan e-news. It comes out every Wednesday and it has highlights. And then if something interests you, you can click on that, and it's really good and well received.
Oh
Now,
no, put that back a second. Put that back, that last page.
Okay.
Hold on.
Okay.
The notifications on that page as well to sign up.
So I'm gonna go. There
I wasn't
any
finished.
limitation?
Can you just
Here,
put that for one more second?
Okay.
Water, California. Okay.
Got
Thank
it?
you. Yes,
Sure.
thank
Okay. So flood managed aquifer, people refer to it as FloodMAR, and it's using floodwaters for managed aquifer recharge. And I think you've heard in the news, you're all aware that groundwater has been depleted. I showed you that one slide where the ground has subsided by over 30 feet. In addition to higher runoffs, which I was talking about earlier, some thoughts have been used, and it's sort of been influenced by other activities in other states, Arizona, Colorado, and then around the world. We were talking about being influenced by other countries. And so they capture the flooding waters that aren't needed for streams, and they can hold it on orchards or crops. This is a vineyard. And they're learning that, contrary to what had been thought, that having standing water for a long time for certain vineyards and orchards, that it's okay. And there are other ways to recharge groundwater, but this way is kind of cool because around is helping the crop in a way, circulating down to the groundwater, and through that percolation, it's cleaning because of the process of how that works. So this is a major program that has been embraced by several counties in the state. And one of the things that I'm working on at Sonoma State with my students is they're coming up with policies to recommend to the Sonoma Water Agency, and it will include aquifer recharge. And so look, this is multi-benefit. This is how it works. It helps with flooding, which means it helps with us in our cities. It helps with the ecosystem. All of us support that. It helps with groundwater. It actually increases water supply reliability because now you're recharging groundwater, and many communities actually use groundwater. And then water quality, because of the nature of percolation through the soils actually will clean the water. And the integrated water management process, to me, is the ideal way to make this happen. These are people that can sit down together. Urbans can be at the same table with the farmers, can be at the same table with flood managers, and then work together for a solution. So there are really good examples of this being implemented. The main place that you hear about is in the Central Valley, particularly where the Merced. And you can see from this illustration, you've got the watershed coming down into the floodplain habitat with that floodplain. And you won't see any urban development there. It means this is why you don't want to develop on the floodplains. And then fallowed fields, because the water supply is low, such as the Russian River. So that's a really good example where you have a river that you can't draw from right now, according to state regulations. And so they're just going to fallow their fields. And this is happening in the Central Valley as well. And then sometimes you can just create a recharge basin. That's the basin on the right-hand side. And you see lots of these. Contra Costa has them, Santa Clara has them. Up and down the state, these recharge basins exist. One of the biggest ones is in Kern County. And the purpose, and so then the last of this hierarchy of state policies is the urban water management plan. All of you, having been elected at one time or the other, will have approved an urban water management plan. And the act was passed in 1983. DWR, Department of Water Resources, publishes the guidebook as technical assistance, and it's updated to align with current law. And you can see this online, or you can ask your staff. And the guidebook content is what is in the law with additional recommendations. And the purpose is to assist water suppliers fulfill requirements and support local reliability. As mayor, I was able to create a urban water management planning task force. And that task force included representative liaison from the Planning Commission, the Economic Development Commission, I think Parks and Recreation, and I think that was it. And it was really great. And people said that they really learned a lot about water. And I would strongly encourage you guys to think about doing something like that, because right now most of these are produced by engineers, and they're good. We don't have anything against engineers, but they're good. It's just that it's not involving the public, and it's kind of hard to have a dialogue with the public about why water rates are going up, or why this problem is existing, why you need to bond for a capital improvement. And this urban water management plan really does help establish that. So this is just a summary of the latest changes on the urban water management plan. We have to have water shortage contingency plan with prescriptive elements. And I think all communities in the Bay Area generally would have these, and certainly Southern California. There are some rural communities that might not, but you have to have that contingency plan with your ordinances in place. And then a 5-year drought risk assessment. Some folks are now going to 7-year risk assessment. And these are the changes to the urban water management plan. Need to have a description of reliability that a layperson can understand. and then a long-term forecast for each water supply source. So let's say that you have exported water that you buy, you're a subcontractor to a wholesaler, and you also have groundwater, and maybe there's a surface water. And so for each one of those supply sources, you have to include the effect of climate change with supporting information. And then you have to take a look at projected land use changes. And this gets to the heart of one of the questions that Susan asked, and I'll go into a little bit more detail after this is next to the last slide, I believe. And that if you're going to build on floodplain, that means you have less land for percolation and capturing floodwater. That's a simple way of describing the effect of land use changes. Likewise, if you're going to be planting orchards instead of seasonal crops, that has a change in demand and forecasting. Orchards need to be watered, and where seasonal crops, you can fallow the land for a while. And so forth. So energy analysis now is required. So a lot of this stuff you kind of want to get off of the generator approach and look more at alternative energy sources, solar, wind. Some people are using tidal flows through pipes that actually can drive power. And I don't know if any of you have experience with that, but I can describe that later if you're interested. And then, as you know, we have to document water savings from code standards, et cetera, which is now required because we have to meet certain standards by 2025. And then include the 5 previous years of a system water loss, which is not much different from before. And what that means is that you're not getting the same supply of water. And include, that's the groundwater sustainable plans. So if you have groundwater, if you're in a required area for groundwater sustainability, then you have to have that plan included in your urban water management plan. This just goes on with some more things, more technical things. There are rate case filing, standard studies, reports, and so forth. So it's quite elaborate and quite extensive, and it's a great process. And that's the end of my slide. So I will stop sharing, and I'll go back into my video. So I'll go back to what I was going to talk about. One of the questions I had from Susan was the idea that ag is not cutting back, and that we in the urban communities have been asked to cut back. So I would like to take another stab at that. Ag has lost about 500,000 acres of productive ag land this year because they don't have water. And some of the rice growers in Sacramento Valley haven't planted, and they actually have programs where in the rice growing, it's also habitat for migrating birds. So it has kind of a double whammy for not having rice growing. And then in south of the Delta, the issue there is a little bit more complicated, where there's newer orchards and a lot have been pulled out, and some land has been fallowed, but some land will not come back into ag production. So I'd like to pause for a moment and explain something that you might find interesting. There is a universal contract for all the water contractors, and I don't know how many of you in your city are a subcontractor for state water or federal water. Benicia, for instance, is has the greatest need for state water of all the cities in Solano County, because it's about our only source of water. It's a long story, has something to do with the Army, and anyway, it's a long story. And so the contractor is Solano County Water Agency. That's the contractor. And in Santa Clara is a contractor, and or subcontractor, sorry. And the universal contract applies to all of the contractors. And so there are many articles in the contract. And Article 18, A and B, was changed in the latter part of the 2019. Or is that right? And I'm sorry, it was just before 2020. And there was a lawsuit filed by Planning Conservation League saying that the Department of Water Resources could not change Article 18A and B. And why does that matter to us? Because from the initiation of the contract in the late 50s, early 60s, 18A and B read that when there was a drought, urban would get the water first. And if there was any left over, ag could get the water. And then after 7 years, if it was still in drought, then it would be back to splitting what was available between urban and agriculture. The contractors changed that so that it no longer applies. And that is why you saw a huge amount of new planting, mostly of almond orchards, but also other orchards. And so once that contract was changed, it meant you could plant orchards because you were no longer threatened with the idea that you wouldn't have water the first year of a drought. But now we're into some pretty serious drought, and some of those orchards are being ripped out and probably won't be replanted. But I just thought you'd like to know that as a historical footnote, the reason we had so much increase in orchard planting in California was because of that change of a simple contract article that nobody ever paid attention to.
Wow.
So ag, as I said, they have not been farming over 500,000 acres. This creates a lot of problems. There's a whole lot of people that are dependent on 500,000 acres. And so the state needs to help on retraining. It needs to make sure that there is a job for these folks after agriculture. And so it's not a one-time thing. So when ag, you saw where in a drought year, ag took about half of that's developed water. That's not free-flowing water, of which there's almost none, but there is in Northern California, there's a fair amount. But the issue is that the urbans use about 7 to 8% of developed water. So I will pause as you process that. And so I will tell you that common sense is that we are not going to have dry taps unless the drought is so severe that everybody has dry taps. No ag, no taps. And let's hope we don't wind up there. The requirement for the urban communities to do this 20% is not on per household. It's 20% of the water supplier. So in our case, the city of Benicia needs to have saved 20%. So they have commercial sites that don't need to water green lawns in front of their buildings. And there are other measures that can be done. So you can achieve that 20%. So those of us who have been saving water, I haven't had a lawn for 35 years. Those of us who've been saving water and being good conservationists and using water efficiently don't have to come up with another 20% that we probably don't have. So that should clarify that misunderstanding. But at the end of the day, we are a state that built our suburbs and our yards. And that was our vision. That was our value. And the state didn't say that is really bad. You should have no yards and you should not be living in suburbs. They didn't say that. They could have. They've certainly done enough in the last few years to affect cities. And so I think it's inappropriate to expect cities to sacrifice trees. You can get rid of the lawn. You don't need the lawn, but to sacrifice trees and the vegetation that a lot of people have put in. So I think the message is not being clear. And and that's one of the things I would like to to work on to make sure that the state understands that we have an investment in our properties that matter, and that it needs to be acknowledged. And that isn't to say that we should be selfish and not think about water conservation or anything like that. It's all of the above, and we're doing our part. So for ag, the issue there is you've got ag in areas that it shouldn't be. You shouldn't be watering the desert, in my opinion. And there are other things, and that's happening, and it's painful. And so we need to recognize that we want that to be successful for everybody. We don't want people to be thrown out onto the street because the water has been cut off for ag. I don't mean to oversimplify things, but I sort of want to make that story more complex than perhaps it comes across in the news. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I generally can answer almost all questions pertaining to water and the delta and rivers and that sort of thing. And if I don't have the answer, I will get it for you.
Great. Oh my gosh. I'm shocked, to put it mildly, that we are in the state that we are, like you're telling us, and we all know it. And there's this absolute monolith of work we've got to do to be able to fix this and survive this. And, you know, to be brutally honest, with all the water rights being kind of privately held, do we have a chance of doing this?
Well, there are 4 types of water rights in California, and the one that is the top water right is the public resources doctrine, public trust doctrine. Sorry, and one of the brilliant people in water was quoted when she was chair of the board as saying, if I get her right, it's Felicia Marcus, if I get this right, she said that when it comes to the end of the day, the public trust doctrine prevails. And she didn't take much stock in the other water rights because they're really a rental right. It's not an ownership right. So people, when they say it's our water, it's really not. It's the public trust water. And so some people, in fact, it's been proposed in the legislature this year, and Planning Conservation League actually proposed it as well, and that is to change California water rights. Many people, including me, think that that's probably not a good idea, that we won't live long enough to make that happen. But in New Zealand, I believe it was New Zealand or Australia, they actually they're more federal in their water, and so they have a more control and authority. But nonetheless, they kind of went around the issue of water rights, and they put some deals together. And I think that's what we see. We see water trading, we see groundwater banking. So like, let's take an example. You have a big atmospheric river that comes in, and a lot of rain precipitation comes through the system, and there's enough that can be captured that isn't needed by the streams for the fish, et cetera, that can be captured and stored in a groundwater bank. And a city puts money into that bank, and they have basically bought that water, and they get to withdraw that water when they need it. And this is happening now with community in Santa Cruz and Pajaro Water District. So that's one angle, is that that's a workaround with a water right. And you can, and then they're talking about doing trading with groundwater. There's always been talk about trading. There's been up and down efforts for trading water. So it's probably more going to be a marketplace rather than a water rights change, I think.
Okay.
Another
Thank
thing
you.
that the state is also in the process, we don't need legislation for, is regulations, and the regulations are moving along to the point where they'll probably be adopted next year, mid-year, maybe sooner. And that is all tertiary treated water does not need to go to purple pipes. It can now go into regular potable pipes.
Oh, okay. That will help fix the problem with distribution. That's what I'm hearing.
Exactly, because it's very expensive to put the double
The
distribution.
new, right, exactly. Oh, so what would that mean for a city? Because we don't have purple pipes. Like, what would that mean for a city like Lafayette, who's far away from recycled water?
So if you do your own, Lafayette doesn't do its own water treatment, does it?
No, East Bay Mud.
Yeah, well, then they'll treat the water and put it in potable pipes.
Ah, okay. And we just grab it. We just use it.
Right.
Okay. Right.
I mean,
Thank you.
you'll be paying for it, but
Right. So I have one more question before I go to these other fabulous questions. Is this the UWMP? So
urban
we
water
all have to,
management plan.
right, and we all need to get one. And you said we should get a task force. It sounds like each city has to do this. Have there been any attempts to make it more of a regional effort rather than every single city, does their own, or a city is so different that doing it regionally wouldn't make sense?
So there's some gold standard leadership in the state. One of them is Metropolitan Water District, MWD. And they kind of did that. I don't quote me on this, but I think
Mhm.
there are like 29 members or something, maybe 45. I don't know. There were a lot of members of MWD. And so, yes, the law requires each city to do it, but you can collaborate. Closer to home for me is Santa Clara. And Santa Clara is one of the gold star leaders in the state as well. And they worked out something long time ago, that you would use the same metrics, the same units, and they would work with the cities. And so it was a unifying urban water management plan. So even though the cities adopt it, it is a unifying urban water management plan. Solano County Water Agency, I wanted to try this out. I was staff at DWR and I was working with Santa Clara, and I thought it was a brilliant approach. And so we wanted to spread that around. And then meanwhile, I get elected. And so I thought this would be really cool for the Solano County Water Agency. And I proposed that. And it was very, very difficult. And so they were afraid of losing control. They thought that if they had Solano County Water Agency as a central agent, if you will, that somehow that would take away the authority and power and ownership of the city.
Got it. Okay. Got it. I can see that would be at least an issue to think about.
Yeah. So you have an adopted urban water management plan. Every city has an adopted urban water management plan. It's someplace on your website in your city. Right. And the sad thing is that you don't know it, right? And that was why I set up this task force, because I wanted people to know that there was an urban water management plan. It's a very cool thing. And everybody that served on the task force said, I didn't know that. I didn't know that about water. And so
Exactly.
Right.
Thank you. All right. Great advice. Thank you. All
Okay.
right. Anita had her hand up first. And introduce who you are to Ms.
Hi,
Patterson.
thank you, Ms. Patterson. My name is Anita Enander, currently mayor of Los Altos, former employee, U.S. Geological Survey Water Resources Division, and I'll date myself by saying Dave Kennedy ran DWR in those days.
Oh, wow. Our last engineer.
Yeah, so that gives you some idea. I really have first a comment for my colleagues and then a question for you. And that is, when you've talked about water banking and so on, I hope people understand that when you've had subsidence, like what you showed in that first photo, that groundwater aquifers are not like sponges. You can, once you've had compression and you've had subsidence, you have lost the ability to store water in those aquifers, or substantially lost. And so it's a point of no return. Once you take out so much groundwater, you will lose the ability to store it there. And many people envision groundwater as being stored in like underground lakes, and those don't exist. That's not real. So it's important for people to understand that. And so capturing and managing groundwater resource in California, extremely complex, something the state ignored for many years, but I'm pleased to say, I'm going to say in about the last 25 years, I forget when we first had our first statewide groundwater management plan, but it wasn't long enough ago. So now my question to you, because I'm fascinated by this idea of using vineyards and orchards and so on for recharge. I'm of course in Santa Clara County. I grew up with a knowledge and understanding of how our recharge facilities work and that they directly are connected to our productive aquifers. So I've got a kind of an esoteric question, and that is, how good is the mapping statewide that
It's a brilliant question.
that cities
I-
can now, or communities could now use to say, if we want to use this acreage, which we think is subject to flooding, or that we could divert water for flooding, are we going to have productive recharge of productive aquifers or not? And if not, do we have a model that shows the trade-off for doing upstream storage where we can then release to exposed margins of productive aquifers? And I know you're going to understand that, but I'm sorry if I lost everybody
You're
else.
geeking out on this, Anita. It's awesome.
I am so well, and my mother was a former executive at Santa Clara Valley Water District, so I grew up on
Oh.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Santa Clara is, first of all, it's all soils, right? And we don't
Right.
teach soils in this state. The fact is, the county in Texas has more soil scientists than the entire state of California.
That's sad.
And then here's another thought. The Soil Conservation Service started in 1935, right? And it was to prevent or to help the farmers never have another Dust Bowl.
Right.
And guess when the Soil Conservation Service finished its soil survey for San Joaquin County? So I said 1935 is when it started. Just give me a year that you think the San Joaquin soil survey was completed.
I don't think they finished it till the 80s.
The early 90s.
Okay.
Wow.
The most productive ag land in the United States. Now, why? And it's politics. Anyway, I just had to say that because soil is to the heart of what you're talking about. So, because we have the different hydrologic units, which I showed you in that one slide, the soils are different and the runoff is different. You have different fluvial regimes because of rock or soil. So it's either flowing fast through rocks or spread out like a branch, a dendritic branch. So it really depends on how that flow is working. In Central Valley, it's, as you know, Sierra is glaciated. And so a lot of the early glaciation dug these deep channels and wide channels. And then over time, they were filled up with sediment, but still it's loosely consolidated soil. So some scientists from Stanford and Davis in particular, and also working in collaboration with Denmark, have a couple of techniques for finding those ancient canyons, and they are identifying them to capture the water and recharge that area, because Anita is so correct that it would be hard. So not every soil collapsed completely. So it's like a house. Soil is like a house. Think about a frame of the house, and you have the organic stuff in the house. And so when you don't have water, when you extract water out of it, a lot of the soil will collapse. The framing collapses. And that's why you can't recharge the groundwater. But that's not true in all areas. One of the largest capacity for groundwater is Mojave. And you can, there are many ways of getting water to store in Mojave. So there are lots of opportunities for water storage, and it takes good soil scientists. And it also takes some very interesting technique, everything from remote sensing to some of these, you probably know the name of the little geotech drones that fly over the land, and they're measuring the density of the soil. Is sort of like a LIDAR approach, but it's a magnetic approach, not a LIDAR. So lots of things are happening. Arizona has captured and stored water, flood mar type. They just call it mar. They don't call it flood mar. And they actually have a economic system around that, and they have a government system around it. So we could learn a lot from how Arizona does it, which is kind of weird that I'm saying we need to look to Arizona, but that is it. So yeah, so in the Russian River, because of my classwork and everything, there are different possibilities. The vineyards could take the heavy flows during the winter and recharge the groundwater, and then have their water supply with that recharged groundwater. So Sonoma Water Agency is helping them and working some things out. It's not like a big flood that you have to capture. I mean, there are different magnitudes of the rainwater capture. Did that help, Anita? She left.
Yeah, and I think she.
No, very cool, very cool. Just really thrilled because the more we're doing with groundwater management, well, let's just say that's great news.
Yep.
Awesome.
So it took 100 years from the time that the first water rights legislation was passed in 1914. And we were the last state in the United States of America to have groundwater legislation.
Yeah, which is insane, totally insane.
Well, it goes back to why the San Joaquin soil survey wasn't done until the 1990s.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you.
So do you both think that we really can recover from this? I mean, from that amount of neglect? Is that why we have the $350 billion, part of it is the technical debt on things like that? Is that part of your $350 billion number?
I think there's a lot that could be achieved. The environmentalists are not waving flags about this because they're a little concerned about you need to have high flows to scour your streams. And so they want to make sure that that's a calculation included, but there's a generally fairly good acceptance of the basic concept. You just need to have your guidance and guiding principles adopted so you don't go off doing more harm. And then there's a lot of ag interests in this because they're hurting big time. And the cities, I tried to do this. It was one of my major functions at DWR, was try to get more city planners to sit down with flood managers, because the cities could save money in flood protection by working with flood management instead of armoring themselves. And I think some cities get that. More cities could get that. So Sonoma County, for instance, has the highest rate of flooding of any county in California. And so it really behooves them to do something because they have the largest number of claims of flooding on Russian River. And the feds just aren't interested in going back again and again and again and again.
I don't blame them.
And just to be sure folks understand, the reason you have to scour the stream beds is because low flow drops sediment. Sediment fills in, fish can't spawn. That's the bottom line. So that's why you have to have high flows that flush out the sediment periodically.
Man, Anita, it would be so fun to serve on council together.
Oh, I don't have anybody on council who knows anything about water. Never mind.
All right.
We have no idea.
I still have my
Desperate,
copy
I
of the first
Many
report one of the first reports I worked on called Flood Prone Areas and Land Use Planning in Napa County, done with HUD and the Corps and Napa County Water and USGS cooperative study, 1976.
Nice. All right.